Morning, everyone. My name is Denny May, and I will be your host for today here at KVEC. Certainly, it's good to have everybody here together today. And so, without further ado, if you've had a chance to sign in, you can use that QR code, and we'll go ahead and get started. And really, uh, the whole idea of this principal support network is to share information with principals that is vital to um, the implementation of IDEA and the IDEA law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a vast law. It's a law that dates back to 1975 and with the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. And then, Public Law 94-142 was also a name for it then. And it's evolved, and the laws evolved, and we've evolved, and we've got different challenges. And so we're going to talk about some of the trends that we see currently. We're going to talk about a lot of what David Bateman has to say about what's going on in the legal world in terms of IDEA. And so the one place that we want to start our discussion today is just this basic understanding of how the law works. Okay. Um, and as we think about how the law works, and as we circle back to what we're going to try to work through today, we're two or three big rocks is we're going to look at how the law works. We're going to look at what some of the current trends are and what some of the challenges that principals face. And then also just looking at IDEA and breaking it down into kind of a two-part really test, sometimes referred to as the Raleigh-Andrew test. And a lot of what we are actually supposed to apply and implement in schools really traces back to what those two cases have told us is appropriate for providing a free, appropriate public education, what makes a free, appropriate public education actually appropriate. And so on this slide right here, we just have, federal special education law, and the source is U.S. Congress. And of course, IDEA is the main law, and the purpose ensures FAPE. And it also it ensures FAPE in a least restrictive environment. And just to really quickly, just think about what it does. It defines eligibility categories. It requires an IEP. It provides due process and parent rights, and it requires states to monitor compliance. So one takeaway here is this is kind of the overarching law. Okay, this is kind of the law that we can't deny that students have eligibility categories. We can't deny a student that's eligible an IEP. We also recognize that they have due process and parental rights, and that there's going to be some monitoring. Um, Federal law states federal law this sets the minimum standard, okay, that all states must meet. So in every state, these are going to be applicable. And then as you move on, then you have special education state laws. And in Kentucky, it's KARs, Kentucky Administrative Regulations. But, it's passed by the state legislature and implemented by the State Department of Education. And the role here is to interpret the federal law and then to expand it to fit the state's context. So it gives us some flexibility in terms of, making it work for our state and what our demographic needs are. And so some examples of state additions would be how eligibility is determined, and one we always talk about, Jennifer, is, are we going to use the discrepancy model when it comes to defining the LD, or are we going to use the RTI model? And of course, we know that recently we've seen just an adjustment. It used to be in the old days we did just the discrepancy model, and now we have a choice as an ARC, but there's some pretty strict regulations that we have to follow around that. And then age range for services. Some states go beyond the federal requirement of ages 3 through 21. In our state of Kentucky, the student, by law, is afforded services until they turn 21. Now, sometimes local districts will weigh in on that, and they'll do that a little bit differently. They just understand that if they go beyond the age of 21, that the services are not going to receive any funding. And so that's kind of the way it works in Kentucky. And then you go to some states like up in the Northeast, it goes through age 22. it goes to age 22, so that the whole 21st year is serviced. So that's a little, nuance in the law that you see. And then you have additional parental notice requirements or timelines for evaluations that states can require. And so states cannot give less than IDEA requires, but they can require more. And then, um, and then if you look here, the local special education policy, district level, school boards and district administrations um, are the source for that. And for the longest time in Kentucky, the Kentucky School Boards Association has um, taken on the responsibility of providing LEAs with uh, some oversight in regards to what their policies are to provide them with a service, and most districts adhere to that. And for a long time, of course, Teresa Combs worked with Kentucky School Boards Association, and she did a lot of the policy writing for districts, and she's still involved in that somewhat. And so she's one that we lean on. Of course, we lean on Brenda Combs here, our director for compliance, in terms of how our local policies, fit and work within this whole landscape. And so, you know, uh, honestly, the role here is to implement both the federal and the state law. So we can't forego what those laws tell us, and we can't make it. We can't make any kind of policy. And sometimes what we see, Jennifer, is districts will have site-based councils, and they don't understand this. And so we really need to get this information out to the principals, because those site-based councils are kind of led by the principals. And superintendents sometimes has oversight responsibility, or maybe they're on part of the site-based but not on all of it. And so the understanding is that we can't create a policy that supersedes federal law. And sometimes it really shows its face when we're talking about discipline. You know, uh, we'll make a policy, and it's a good policy. It's for the good of the whole school. But it does not then take into account some of the requirements from IDEA, that students with disabilities have additional protections under the law. Those are civil rights that they're afforded because they have an IEP. And so, you have to have a review process of those policies before those become, something that you're practicing year after year after year. And so local policies must stay in line with both federal and state law, but can differ in practice from one district to another. And here's some examples, like an evaluation timeline. Um, I don't know many that tighten this down in Kentucky. I don't think anybody in our region does this, but here's just an example of, like, the federal law requires an evaluation within a reasonable time after consent. The Kentucky state law defines it at 60 school days. And of course, we have to make a distinction between calendar days and school days there. And then local A, District A, for example, might say, well, we're going to require our folks to have it done in 45 days, so we don't have any timeline issues. And that might be a best practice in some places, but we know with resources that sometimes that's a difficult thing. And so we don't want to handcuff ourselves too much with that. Of course, you would still be in compliance with the state if you got it within the 60 days. So I kind of understand that kind of thinking. And then, with transition planning, you see the federal law requires a transition plan beginning at age 16. Kentucky state law requires it starts earlier. We start doing some of that career planning and career awareness, and we start to look at a multi-year course of study at age 14. And but then when you look at a local policy, it might mandate all transition goals be reviewed at every annual ARC meeting with career readiness surveys included. And so that's probably not a bad mandate as we go forward, because when we get into trying to report on indicator 13, as much as we want to be 100% compliant, it's a very difficult and high standard to meet. And so that's the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of how the law differs. Now, I just want just kind of sum it up here. In short, federal law are the baseline rules for the whole country. The state law adds more details and stricter requirements, and local policy decides how to carry out those laws in their practices and their practice in their local neighboring neighborhood schools and districts. Let's go on. And some other examples here: evaluation timelines, of course, and then the differences there. But just looking at the trends, in special education, I just want to he wrote a book called Current Trends of Legal Issues in Special Education: Clarity in the Implementation of FAPE. Can you hear it? Can you time it? Is it something? It's something you can really work with. It's an action. It's an action that you can measure. And and then, of course, progress monitoring data I've already alluded to. Uh, Bateman says that's the number one thing when he goes to a due process. If you don't have it, might as well go ahead and just get ready to pay. It's like he said, it's like shooting in the dark. That's what he said. It's like shooting in the dark, and that's probably a poor analogy to use in any type of school meeting, but um, we get the point, right? We get the point that if we go into a due process hearing and we do not have data that supports that we did something with the child, and this next one plays right into that. Knowing the kid's not making progress, going through a 9 week period. Okay, you've got data, but you see the data says not making any progress, and then we don't make any adjustments instructionally, behaviorally. We don't make any attempt to make any changes because the number one thing that everybody hates to hear is we have to have another meeting. Okay. So we've got to change that narrative and change that thinking. And we also got to get that word out that just because a child needs a change instructionally does not mean you have to have an ARC meeting. You can just document that in your progress monitoring with a broken vertical line a broken vertical line. And you can put that in your update and you can explain that. You know what I'm saying? When you go to that ARC meeting, you say, here are the things we were doing. We saw a little drop here and we needed to increase support, or we had a goal that was way too easy. We needed to drop some support. But failure to act is huge. And he says it really shows its head with behavior. That's the number one place where it shows that it's going to cause you problems is you have a student that's having outstanding behaviors, for lack of a better way of putting, and it, and you get them on the radar, but you don't ask what's going on with the IP goals. And so I tell principals all the time, hey, when you get a kid on your desk, the first thing you need to do is check and see, does he have a flag? Does he have an IEP goal? What do we have a behavior intervention plan? Do we need functional behavioral assessment? We need to find out what's going on with this kid. And that goes across all disabilities. And then so down there, you said parent involvement. Parent involvement was right up there in the top, right? Parent involvement is a huge piece of the trends that we're seeing in special education because we're having a harder and harder time getting parents. And parental involvement sometimes, from a legal standpoint, who can be the parent becomes an issue, right? Who can be the parent? So as principals, we need to make sure that we're working with the right people because it can get you in a ton of hot water quickly if you have not verified who has the right to make decisions for that student when they're under the age of 18. Um, and then we did a whole session yesterday, and Alex and I continue to work on those sessions around AI. And we've learned some things. Just yesterday, we learned some things about AI and the use of AI, and how Copilot and uh, Gemini are approved for district use because they come through the Microsoft suite or they come through the Google suite. And so, if you prefer to use ChatGPT, you can link up to it through that, but you shouldn't be using that as a tool that is doing all your work for you. It's only a tool that is going to help enhance the instructional services, the knowledge base. And so we use it as a tool for training to show people how they can get answers to hard questions when they're developing IEPs or they're working with specially designed instruction and making sure there's internal consistency in the IEP. And so, as we move forward, just that whole use of assistive technology and the fact that we've got people. And the one thing that struck me that Bateman said, and I said this the other day in your all's meeting, I'm repeating a lot of things, but he said that parents were taking these things and loading them into uh, artificial intelligence machines and coming back to the district and saying, hey, you're not providing my son or daughter with FAPE. And so that's, we got to at least know about it and be aware of it and know how to answer questions about it. And then that whole inclusion piece, making students feel like they're part of the program, right? You're welcome here. You're a student first. You're a general education student first. We know you got a couple of little things layered on top here, and we really need to underscore how important it is that we do everything we can to include and not exclude. And so that's that's huge. Here's some other things, current trends. ARC chairperson training, improper ARCs and LRE is a trend that we are seeing sometimes, because when we review files, we see evidence that meetings are not being held, or maybe uh, a district might have an LRE, and all our LRE statements are exactly the same. They're using the same reasons why they would restrict an environment. And, for those keeping score at home, least restrictive environments, basically, you're just saying that to the maximum extent appropriate, we're going to educate students with disabilities with their non-disabled peers. And I always go back and say to the maximum extent appropriate. And so we have to figure out, you know, that should be a very individualized decision, and it should be based on data and the needs that are uh, uh, documented within that IEP. And so we're doing what we can with ARC chairperson training. Um, One of the things that really struck me a few years ago was the lack of pre-service in special education that principals have, and that's the reason that we do this principal support network. But really, certainly, it struck me really hard when I realized this. I went to do this ARC chairperson training one-on-one with this principal, and he just stepped into the principal's role, and he looked at me and he said, "I've never been in an ARC meeting. I've never had a class in special education. I don't know what you're talking about." And so we really have to work around that. We have to really make sure that the people that are in leadership roles understand the responsibility that they have, not only for ensuring that there's proper IPs, there's measurable goals, there's least restrictive environment being applied properly, and that specially designed instructions being implemented, and um, it's being monitored, because that's really the role of that principal. That's one of their roles. And when they understand that, if they would get into those practices, and they would do that consistently, that it would have far-reaching impact on their school, and improve all children's outcomes. Then they start to get it. They start to. So we're just doing what we can to make sure that, and if you haven't been trained, it's no fault of your own, or if you've not been required to be trained, or if you've not been in an ARC, it's no fault of your own. I mean, we're not saying anybody's done anything wrong here. We're just recognizing the fact that there's a gap, and we need to try to do all we can to fill it. And so that's what we're trying to do with the work that we do here. And I know that you're doing the same thing locally there. And then this lack of resources, we alluded to it earlier. uh, when we consider that IDEA is only funded to 20% from the federal level, then that's going to impact the state, and then the state's going to impact the local policy. That's a huge piece right there, and so we have to just kind of maximize what we can do with folks, and try to, you know, it's almost like akin to solving a puzzle. You know what I'm saying? And when I was a director, it was one of the hard. I say it's one of the hardest jobs I had to do, was to be able to make sure that I had coverage everywhere, and make sure that if I was paying out an idea, that those people were doing idea things. You know, and so that's a real challenge. And so if we can help you with any of that, and you want us to sit down and put our think tank together, and look at, how programming is occurring, and whether or not, you feel like, are we legal? We certainly can spend some time doing that, but that usually is left up to the district level folk, but that's a hard puzzle to, to solve sometimes. And we realize that. So, and then you got to, your accommodations, never, never can, or never should accommodation take the place of good solid instruction. And but accommodations are important, because we have to be realistic, right? And so we have to find that right balance between instruction and accommodation. And one of the things I can say around this that's not been popular, but things that make a difference sometimes are not popular. I think special ed teachers need to be held accountable for their lesson plans. And I don't want to call it lesson plans, because everybody gets a sour taste in their mouth when you say you got to do another piece of paper. But what I'm saying is that they can prove that they have lessons around those goals, because that's what specially designed instruction is. And our kids are not always getting that. I'm not saying it's happening a lot everywhere, but I'm saying it's, sometimes if you ask the teacher, what are you doing to teach that goal or teach to that goal? They don't have an answer because they're not doing it. And so we really got to think about that. And then, assessment, alternate assessment is a bear in terms of, number one, you got to stay within that 1%, for alternate assessment, and you got to have good reasons for having students on alternate assessment and the documentation around that. As a principal, you need to be able to eyeball those conference summaries and make sure, does this meet the mark? And of course, we've got a ton of stuff out there that supports that. We've got templates, we've got things that can help you and help your teachers. It's time saving types of things. So if you are watching this and you want to send us an email, we're always available to help you with that. I kind of work on the legal kinds of side of that and look at conference summaries and look at IEPs and say, we come in on the CAP training end of it. Once you've been cited for being over 1% of your population on alternate, you're going to get a corrective action. And we've seen some districts go through that. And then I've got evaluation on here. Evaluation is not just for eligibility. Evaluation should be done and conducted in a way that it's going to impact instruction. Okay. And so that's huge. That's huge. And being able to look at those evaluations, make sense of those standard scores, and being able to talk to people in layman's terms, in terms of fostering that parent involvement. We've got to get that down to where everybody can understand what we're talking about, and so understanding the 5 areas of the WISC, understanding how that impacts programming, is huge. And I work with, I'm part of the KEDC and KVEC combined cadre for psychologists, and that's one of my favorite things I do because I have a background in testing and I did that for a lot of years, and I love it. But one of the things that I want to caution everyone about in terms of principles, and you're looking at those evaluations, make sure you're getting all the things that you're paying for. Okay, if you got a contracted psychologist, make sure that they're giving all the right subtests, and make sure that that, because if we have incomplete evaluations, it really minimizes the ability that we have as educators to take that data and say, this is what the student really needs. This is how this looks in specially designed instruction. So here's just some things that we saw with AI. Um, and so one of the things that we saw, that human oversight remains non-negotiable when we talk about AI supported IEP development. Okay. So if we got folks using these tools in our districts, we need to make sure that they understand that the tool is not a substitute for educator expertise. This court case that we're talking about came out of our very circuit court of appeals, our appellate courts. Okay. So it means, in reality, it's the law. It's what we have litigation, because we have in special education law, if it's not written in a KAR, but we've got a court precedent or a ruling or a decision, we have to go by that decision. Okay. And so this district in Tennessee was using AI and Grammarly as a workaround. And they were just letting it do it for them. And it was a FAPE violation according to the court. And it masked addressing the real problem, and it cost them 900 hours of compensatory ed. And so we would caution you to work with your folks and make sure that they understand that if you're using AI, that you're doing it ethically, you're doing it responsibly, and that you're not identifying folks within these machines, because once you put that and it goes out there over that threshold, you can never pull it back. It's out there, right? And so we don't want to be identifying folks and breaking and having FERPA violations along with our FAPE violations. So, and then I'm going to go on. Let's see if I can go back here. That was one thing that I wanted to share with you. And then as we move on, we're talking about principals and their role. in regards to what we're seeing in the literature. Principals are responsible for all students. Okay. And we need to make sure that principals understand that the more they put that kind of message out and that kind of vision out in their schools, and they lead in that way, it's gonna take care of a lot of issues in regards to legality and providing faith. From the moment a student is assigned to a school, the principal bears the responsibility for that student's education, including students with disabilities. Parents may know the principal, but even if they don't know the special education director, so the principal is the face of the school, right? Um, I used to work with Mr. Green, and he would tell the principals in our staff meetings, when I pull in as a parent, when I pull in to that school parking lot, the one car that I look for is yours, right? So the principal is the face of the school. So the principal needs to be well versed in inclusive practice, and they need to have the attitude that all students matter. And most of our people do. They accept that all students can learn at a high level. And parents may know the principal, even when they don't know the special ed director. Principals are often the immediate face of accountability. Here's some other information that come from the book. Become or have a conversation with special education concepts, law, and practice. Make sure that principals do not come into their roles already deeply trained, and most of them don't come into their role deeply trained. Is what I'm saying here. And so we need to help them with those things, and we need to provide them with all the resources. And this includes knowing processes such as evaluation, IEP. We've kind of talked about that already. Knowing what the staff roles are, knowing what the legal requirements are, uh, understanding the rights of families and students, and just being walking that tightrope around that. It's a lot to take in. I mean, it really is. And sometimes I think, you know, it's basically all I've ever done, really. In terms of, I've lived in the special ed world, and I know I have a lot of experiences from that world. But if you've not been trained in, or not, if you don't look through that lens first, sometimes you have to help folks see that. And so we're always looking for the best suggestions on how we can, help to educate and help to support our folks. The principal is responsible. This was kind of like 9 themes from this law chapter in this book. The principal is responsible for the education of all students. The principal needs to be familiar with the concept and practices of special education. Principal needs to ensure staff know what is necessary for providing special ed services. The principal needs to verify staff are properly implementing those services. He has to lead efforts in data collection. He needs to be aware of the processes for identifying students with disabilities. You know, you think about that young man that I was training, never been in an ARC meeting, and now he's going to make eligibility determinations possibly. That's a big jump. Intellect. That's not to say we're doing rocket science or anything, but it is a lot to think about. It's a lot of terminology. It's a lot of numerical representations of data, and so yeah, it's a lot. It's really, and then leading meetings related to services for students with disabilities, knowing all students in the building, not just those in general ed or just in special ed, and being ready to talk to them, and then preventing discipline problems are all the ways that Bateman sees that principals' roles are defined. Again, here it is, just a representation of all that is there. The principal's responsible for education. The principal needs to be familiar with the concept of special ed. It's that same thing right there. Okay. Those themes right there come straight out of that book. Um, and the one down there at the bottom, preventing discipline problems, man, that's a tough one, isn't it? That takes a lot of their time. Just that prevention, so an ounce of prevention's like a pound of cure. If we can get kids responding, we can get kids building relationships. There's tons of data about formative assessment being moment to moment, and that students are responding with technology and with whiteboards and with thumbs up and thumbs down and all kinds of things, all kinds of tools. And there's a host of videos on their website showing teachers how to implement these things. And so legal compliance is non-negotiable, and it's complex. The legal framework governing special education dictates not just what services students get, but how they get those services, when they get those services, and who must be involved, and how much progress is monitored, and how that progress is being monitored. So that's a big undertaking for principals. And so I've been telling them too, hey, uh, what would be wrong with you going in and modeling a little short lesson on engagement? What would be wrong with you going in and showing them that you understand especially design instruction, and you put tons of change in your pocket, and you grow people. You're leading by serving, and so we're big on transformational change, transformational leadership style, and a lot of that is just that very thing that we're talking about with student to administrator. We're talking about administrator to teacher. Intellectual stimulation, making sure they know the vision, making sure they understand the vision, and that the principal doesn't just talk the talk, but he walks the walk, and he can be the person that can lead, and they can actually go in and model a lesson. And I think teachers would love it if they thought that their administrators still had that ability, they still had that mojo, and they could come into that classroom and they could really demonstrate in 15 minutes a short lesson on engagement, or a short lesson on progress, data collection, or formative assessment. Those are the pieces that we're missing. And I see it as vital. And the book talks about it a lot. And in some of the work that I'm doing beyond that, uh, it really talks about being the true leader in the school means more than just managing behavior issues. And I know that they do much more than that. I'm not being uh, living in a glass house here and throwing stones. I'm just saying, those are some of the things that are according to empirical data, and what's going on out there in schools. You want to make a change, you have to live that change, and you have to, and you have to be willing to serve in a way that you're not asking them to do things that you wouldn't do yourself. So we'll go on. Uh, Advocacy, this kind of plays in communication with staff. Kind of this slide kind of goes with what we just talked about. Principals are not just executors of law, they're leaders and advocates. They need to build a culture where special education is integrated, inclusive, and understood by all staff, not viewed as separate or other. It should be a service, and not a separate entity, but part of the school. And communication with staff, parents is vital. Expectations, roles, services, progress are all part of that. Ensuring staff are trained, supported, and that classrooms and school structures, physical access, scheduling, facilities are able to meet the needs of all students with disabilities. Now we've talked about that, just what your leadership style is, and how you go about that is really huge. If you're going to be the leader of the school, you need to wear it. You need to be the person that's walking the walk and not just talking the talk. Inclusion and accessibility are central. Schools must make accommodations for physical access, sensory access, and principals need to anticipate and remove barriers. Students with disabilities should be included to the maximum extent possible. It goes back to LRE in regular classes, extracurriculars, assemblies. This includes ensuring that staff, facilities, and scheduling all support that inclusion. Now we know we can't do anything in that school where we're separating and treating people differently. So just make sure you're, in keeping with that we're looking at. And so the importance of keeping current and continuous learning. Laws change, court rulings happen, regulations evolve, and that's what we try to do. We try to stay at that cutting edge. We try to get informed. We try to listen to the right people. We've got several people and at the end of this presentation, there's a ton of resources. We got several people that we study and that we're involved with almost yearly. We're looking at what's out there, what's around the bend, what's around the corner. And, so the folks like Anita Archer and David Bateman and Teresa Combs and, Ann Benninghoff, especially design instruction. Those are things that we would encourage principals to get involved in keeping up with, and David Bateman has a special education law blog that's completely free. And I think I've got it linked here, and if I don't, I will link it. But it's something you can just get on there and you can look at what's happening in the legal world in special ed, what's new, what's fresh, and they're updating that thing, weekly. And so he does it that along with Mitchell Yale, who is the other guru in special education legal circles. David Bateman, Mitchell Yale are the two people that folks need to be listening to this day and time. And I'm a firm believer in that. And then the principal should attend to special education as part of their ongoing professional growth and their school's mission, not as something extra or inconvenient. So, well, what are we doing here at KVEC? What are we doing here to attack these issues? When we talk about trends that we're seeing, we're talking about the problems with LRE, when we're talking about the problems with evaluations and how those are being used. When we talk about parent participation, we talk about IEP development, we talk about goals being measurable. We talk about, is there data going on? Is there instruction going on that's intentional to the students' goals? Now, the one thing I can say is the data and what we learned in our meeting when we went to Shelbyville with the State Department, the data is pretty strong. We're still not where we want to be in terms of how our students are demonstrating their achievement. Okay. We still have some work to do. The achievement rates, the proficiency rates, the students that are distinguished, with all the supports, and with the fact that, we have about 60% of our students with disabilities spending 80% in the general education classrooms. So we thought that was the problem, right? We thought that was why students weren't growing, is they were not being exposed to the content, and then they're being tested on the content. We're seeing not a lot of movement in our outputs, and so we do have some additional ways that you can access that, right? And so we have cadres. One of these, which we're on today, this Principal Support Network. We have the new Emerging Teacher Cadre. We have the Holler modules, Behavior Autism Cadre. Doug does a tremendous job. We use Kim Howard. We've got an autism problem solving team group that's working. We're working through Larry Taylor and the folks at University of Louisville again. And then we have the low incidence cadre, like I said, that Brenda does, and the Principal Support Network. And then we have instruction specific supports that are all geared toward trying to solve these problems and the end game is, what are the outcomes? Are kids getting better at reading? Are kids getting better at solving executive functioning issues? Are kids getting better at mathematics? Are kids getting better at managing and regulating their own behaviors? Those are the things that we're after, and how we measure that and how we show that is something we can't forego, because when you listen to Dr. Greta Hilton talk to us the other day, she's our associate commissioner. She's OSIL's lead. She's the person that's looking at our districts and how we're doing and providing FAPE. And what she said to us, the message was very clear. And she used an audit and some of the results from an audit that said that results are just not there. We're just not growing as much as we need to be growing. And so I think it's a very big gap in terms of the things and supports we got in place and whether or not it's making a difference. And so that's something we have to really, really, really focus on. So we're doing what we can here at KVEC, and we're always open and here for you. We have mentoring and coaching opportunities. We have UDL, differentiation, MTSS, emphasis on strategies. We got referral and child find tools. We have specific tools around special design instruction that's not listed on here, but we have them. Like we have the reading tool, we have the math tool, we have the behavior tool. Those are all good tools, and so we have modules. And so the way we see it, some of the things that we offer: increased opportunities to respond, increased use of lesson plans, simple data tools. We urge everyone to make sure that they're using the Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring tab. And so, and then Dion does it, the referral and child find tools that she She does great trainings with that. And so those are all things that we have that we can provide. Why it matters. IDEA requires schools to provide FAPE. It's kind of a culminating little discussion here. Court decisions, rallying injury, define what appropriate means. Okay. Uh, Basically, what we had coming out of those two court cases, 35 years apart from 1982 to 2017, 35 years apart, it says that in order to prove that we're providing FAPE, we have to do some things. One, we have to make sure that we're meeting the procedures. We kept that from the Raleigh standard. That Raleigh standard solidified that in 1982 that you've got to provide an IEP and you've got to do some things with that IEP and you've got to have due process. It's got to be protected. That's why when I go in, the first thing I start with a teacher when I'm monitoring, or when I'm mentoring, is I say, okay, tell me what you need first and foremost. What is it? How can I help you? And then if they start to show me their paperwork or they start to show me what's going on, we always go back to the notice and we start with the notice because it's due process. It's procedural, right? And if we don't comply with the procedures, that's part of FAPE because fair procedures make fair outcomes is the thinking. Okay. And so but then it goes a little bit further. How much meaningful benefit are we receiving? And the standard is meaningful benefit, meeting students where they are in light of their unique circumstances, and then providing substance and meaningful benefit from the IEP goals and having progress data to support that and parent involvement in the development of the IEP. That's what we know. Okay. That's what FAPE is. That's what Raleigh told us, and that's what Andrew F. told us. Now, Raleigh was on one end of the spectrum. Amy Raleigh, if you go on here, I've got a picture of her here. You can see her there. What the IEP developed according to IDEA's procedures. Is the IEP reasonably calculated and able to make that to have some benefit? It was a basic floor of opportunity. It was de minimis. But the reason it was de minimis, it was based on her individually. And she was a high functioning kid that was deaf. And what her parents wanted was sign language. They wanted that additional thing. And what they came back in the courts and said is like, we don't have to maximize this opportunity for advancement. We only have to make sure that the student's receiving some benefit or a basic floor of opportunity for advancement. So she was going grade to grade and she was advancing, and it turns out she had a 142 IQ and she's a professor at Berkeley. Okay. So, I mean, this, you're talking about a really, really super bright girl that had a disability. So we have those types of things. That's one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got Andrew, who for all, and I don't mean to put eligibility words in anybody's mouth, but when we come to the Andrew case, that was in 2017, he was on the other end of the spectrum. He was a student that was likely to be in alternate assessment. And so the in between is what we got to be concerned with. How much accommodation, how much service, and how much instruction does a student need from the IEP? And so what they came back and said was the goals need to be ambitious. They need to meet the kids where they are in light of their unique circumstances. So it has to be individualized. So that flies in the face of standards-based IEP sometimes, right? So we have to find that right amount of accommodation, that right amount of instruction from that, because the kids in between those two ends of the spectrum are the ones that we deal with the most, right? We have the extremes, and those cases are the decisions were based on the extremes: high functioning, low functioning. We got kids in them, all kinds of it, and so we got to make sure it's individualized. And so the Supreme Court agreed that parents argued that the IEP failed to provide meaningful progress. If you talk to, I think I've got him in here as I go on, uh, right here on this slide right here. This is Jack, the attorney, Jack Robinson. Okay. And what Jack, if you listen to Jack speak about this landmark case, and Bateman, I did learn that Bateman and Yale actually attended. They went and stood in line. That sounds like something I would do. But I was so impressed by the fact they wanted to be there that day on that monument because they understood the importance of this decision. And so Jack Robinson said the one thing that the school district didn't have was progress monitoring data. So if you're teaching and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and if principals are making sure that that's happening, that the data's being taken on goals, then we're providing FAPE. We've got some juice in our pocket if we do get a parent sideways and we don't do a good job with relationships, or if they just get sideways, no fault of our own, that we got the data that we need to support ourselves. But if we don't have that data, the conventional wisdom is just go ahead and write the check. And so that's what we learned from Andrew. And so here's an implementation checklist for principals. Are our ARC IEP teams trained in Andrew standards? Do IEP goals show clear links to student data? Is progress monitoring in place with adjustments with growth when growth stalls? That knew or should have known, that KVEC, that knew or should have known. When we don't adjust, we're asking for trouble. Our general education teachers engaged in IEP implementation, and is documentation thorough enough to show compliance and impact? There's the resource page that has all the things that we've talked about, some of the folks that we've talked about today, and we appreciate you so much for being here today.